Hello everyone, what's up? So today we are going to talk about RRR in this video, the massive blockbuster to have come out of India. We've discussed why is it that people who have never watched Indian films are getting hooked by this film. It's not coincidence, by the way, it is by design. Early on in this film there are many things that hook the English speaker audience and reels them in. If you would analyze those traps, this film lays out for you. Now, unless you have been living under a rock, you would know that an unsuspecting Indian film called RRR is taking America, the home of Hollywood, by storm. You know, RRR is the first Indian film to break through the American audiences, ever. And what a breakthrough, what a breakthrough. Americans are simply going crazy over it. You know, some are calling it the best film of the year, some are calling it the best film ever. There are some who are asking questions on why Hollywood could not make a movie like RRR. And then there are others who are rating RRR as the #1 film in the list of films this year. You know, we are talking about a list that includes Batman, Top Gun, Jurassic Park, and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Those are the kind of films. So USA Today ranked this film #1 in a list of all those films. It's surreal. Who would have thought of that? I've lived in USA before I settled down in UK, and I travel around the world. One thing I noticed is that there are two kinds of movie audiences in English speaking countries. One, who only watch English or Hollywood films. The second type of audience are who, apart from English films, also dabble a bit into international films like Japanese, Korean, Chinese, French, Spanish, or Russian cinema. Even an Indonesian film like The Raid is fair game for such audience. You know. However, during all my travels, I noticed one curious thing. Even the people who were willing to watch non-English films actively avoided Indian films. They would watch film in almost any language or from any country except a film from India. Obviously, there must be a lot of reasons that these people avoided Indian cinema despite being the largest producer of films worldwide. So how did RRR break these barriers, and how did it hook the audience to make sure they do not simply switch it off and reject it early on in the film? What traps has this film laid out that hooked the audience on? So that's what we are going to analyze in this video. The traps in RRR are laid out very early on, you know. But even before I talk about any of these other traps, there's something funny I want to talk about. The first part I'm going to talk about is something that I could have never imagined in my wildest dreams. Something like this could have had such an impact on some people, many people for that matter. What are we talking about here? Let me tell you. Even before the film starts, there is a legal disclaimer talking about all animals being CGI and no animals having been harmed. You know, that's basically a legal disclaimer that you're supposed to put out in Indian films, right? So it's just a like black screen with just some few sentences in the middle, legal mumbo jumbo, and saying that these animals are CGI, no animals are harmed, like in the film. I got a shock of my life watching some of these reviewers reviewing the RRR. It's unbelievable. Can you believe that so many of the reviewers of this film were affected by this card and they commented on the impact this card had on them during their reviews? All that card does is it says that no animals are harmed, and then it lists out a whole bunch of different animals, that they're all CGI, like it talks about tigers, leopards, wolves, snake, fish, like whole bunch of very large number of animals. It lists out all of them, but they're all CGI. So that's basically legal disclaimer, because it's an Indian film. That's what they're supposed to do, right? And so many of these reviewers, I'm watching the reviews, they're talking about that the impact it had on them was like, oh, this is like setting expectation. Like, I'm going to see all these animals. I'm all in. Like horses, lions, leopards, tigers, like snake, and like all these animals, like wolves we are talking about. So I'm all in. I'm like, wow, I've never seen a legal disclaimer being like received so positively before, you know. And so, you know, the film has altered the reality as we know it. And not one, but many reviewers mentioned such a title card during their review and the impact it had on them. It's just nuts. It's just nuts. You can't believe that. So, the first time when I listened to one such mention in a review, I just ignored it. You know, like, there are all kinds of people and all kinds of things can impact them. But by the time I listened to a mention of that disclaimer from like 3 different reviewers, you know, I was out of my wits. So I was sitting there holding my head thinking, has the world gone nuts? People talking about the title card that only contains a statutory disclaimer that no animals were harmed while making the film, you know. And that's not the only title card they talk about. They talk about other title cards too. So I'm thinking to myself, what on earth has this film done to all these people? Has this film put a spell on all these people or altered their brain chemistry somehow that they're all like, you know, not only just reviewing the film, they're like talking about the title cards of the film. Can you believe that? But anyways, this is significant, I guess. When the title cards of the film have such an impact on people, then you know the film needs to be analyzed carefully to find out why it had such an impact. And that's what we're going to do in this video and a few other videos that we're going to make in RRR series. So just you know, we'll do like thorough analysis of each and every aspect of RRR. In this video, we would analyze the early sections of the plot and see what is in RRR that basically hooked the English-speaking audience. Because that hook has to be in the beginning of the film. Otherwise, people would just switch off and they would just walk away saying like, okay, you know, you need to hook those people who have never been introduced to Indian cinema. You need to hook them early on in such a way that they can't switch off. They're just like, yeah, I need to see more. I need to watch more. So what are those hooks? That's what we're going to talk about. Analyze the early part of this film. And let me tell you one thing. When I analyzed RRR, I found out that this film lays out traps very early on. Very early on. And these traps are so well placed, you know, during the early scenes, that it basically like just reels people in, like hook, line and sinker. You know, it just traps people and just reels them in. Poor audience are left with no choice but to simply surrender and go along on the ride, helpless. You know, that's how well this movie has laid out those traps and those hooks to reel the audience in very early on in the film. And we're going to talk about those now. So let us look at these traps one by one and see what is going on. So the film opens with a title card that says the story. It is as clear as it gets. It tells you that what you're about to see is the plot of the film, right? This evokes curiosity, obviously, psychologically, when you see that, oh, the story, okay, what's the story? That's what comes to your mind. So people would watch for a little while before deciding whether to switch the film off or not. So this card alone gets the people to watch for at least a little bit before rejecting the film or before switching it off. Then the scene opens with a lady Scot, a blonde white woman sitting among some tribals, enjoying the song of a little tribal girl called named Mallie. Then emerges the Governor Scott and his entourage back from a hunting trip. They basically kidnap the girl. Then there is a scene where Governor Scott gives a speech about the English bullet being more valuable than the life of brown rubbish. This is followed by a brutal scene where a policeman smashes the head of the mother who's pleading the governor for the return of her child. So when you watch this first sequence, first thing you notice is that all the characters are all white and they're all speaking English. So there is very, very low barrier to entry So if it's an English speaking audience, they don't see like out of place because they can understand what's going on, and they see only white characters, so there is that familiarity, and then there are like all these dialogues that are in English. So there is like low barrier for entry for English speaking audience to this film. This film sort of eases English speaking audience into the film and hooks them in before like switching into like other languages. And also, there are obviously a lot of people who do not watch Indian films because of racial prejudices. So like obviously nobody would acknowledge that, it's a sensitive topic, I understand, but I've traveled around the world enough to know that that's a fact. So even those people get hooked onto this scene. Even they don't find any reason to switch off with this scene. Simply because in this scene itself you see that all these white people are superior and Indians are being called white, brown rubbish, and they're inferior, and whites have the power, and how they brutally they can basically kidnap the girl and brutally smash this child's mother on the head with a log because they don't want to waste a bullet, right? So this scene, even the people with racial prejudices get that sort of gratification from this scene. So even those people who don't want to watch Indian films because of that reason or cannot switch off at this point because it just appeals to them, that whole thing itself, right? So obviously that may be just something secretly that those people think about. Nobody is going to like come out and acknowledge that, most of them at least won't. But that's a fact, that's a fact. So it appeals to those people as well. So it bypasses those barriers as well. And it basically like rubs the plot of the film in your face, that this is the story. This is the story about this little girl being kidnapped by some like white powerful person who is the governor of the country, the white colonists, who basically can do anything they want. They have like the whole police behind them, like they own the whole police, and who can do anything basically. They can just kidnap the girl and smash the mother, on the head. So this plot is set very clearly, very early on, and it's set in such a brutal way that it sets the tone for the rest of the film. Like you immediately realize that it's not Disney. It's not Disney. And then the next chapter is titled The Fire. Now this is a baddest of the badass character introductions of all time. I would say in the history of cinema, not Indian cinema. I'm talking about history of cinema. You gotta see it to believe it. Here again, there are a bunch of white characters being surrounded by a massive mob of Indians. In all practical sense, you can say there is no dialogue in this chapter, and whatever little is spoken is in English. First of all, the action scene in this chapter is one of the best action scenes to have been shot in history of cinema. It is right up there. Second thing that comes anywhere close is Battle of Bastards in Game of Thrones. But even there, Jon Snow had an army behind him, and he nearly loses it if it were not for Sansa to get Lord Baelish to bring in reinforcements. All right. So technically, you cannot even compare this action sequence in RRR to Battle of Bastards either. However, if you imagine the Battle of Bastards where Jon Snow single-handedly faces the whole army of Lord Ramsay Bolton and somehow manages to kill Ramsay alone, like he just goes through that whole army and manages to reach Bolton and kill him, and because he managed to do that, the whole Ramsay's army surrenders in front of Jon Snow. So imagine that. So I'll give you a minute to imagine that. Okay, so now you get what kind of crazy ass scene we are talking about here, right? Of course, they're not fighting with swords in this scene. Ram is just a police officer with a baton in hand, facing off a swarm of some 2,000 people. And he goes out and gets this one guy he wants to arrest and brings him back. Right? So he faces off to these 2,000 people to find that one guy. Imagine Jon Snow like flowing through that army, like killing everyone on the way to reach like Ramsay and then killing him. Right? And it's not like he plows his way in like a bulldozer. No. They spent 32 days shooting this scene with hundreds of extras and took care to make it seem plausible. You can feel the claustrophobia of that scene. It is the most amazing thing ever shot in cinema. And this scene alone is a must watch. If nothing else, like you have to watch that film just for that scene alone. And then immediately after, there is a bit of social context as well. So you see that Ram is being passed over for promotion despite such heroics, and all the promotions are going to white officers. You know. And obviously that makes Ram angry, so you see Ram shirtless, all ripped and punching the shit out of a punching bag. Until this point, other than things like announcement or promotions or orders for arresting some random dude in the crowd, for all intents and purposes, there is no dialogue in this whole chapter. There is no dialogue until this point in the film. Whatever little is spoken is like 100% in English. Plus there is social context of those times of racial prejudices. So even at this stage, this movie keeps the barrier of entry very low for English speaking audience. It does not matter if the viewer does not know Hindi or Telugu. It does not matter whether the viewer has any racial prejudices. It does not matter if there are any cultural differences. Until now, nothing matters. You know, none of this comes in the way until this point, and any of the people who may have switched off due to these reasons would have found no reason to switch off. So any person who would have switched off because of language or racial prejudice, none of them find any reason to switch off this film until then. Okay. On the other side, you see this hook, right? You see that the most badass action sequences you have ever seen. So you're not likely to switch off. You're not likely to switch off right away. Even if you're not fully hooked into the trap set by this monster action scene, you are likely to at least move on and just see what happens for a little while more, right? So this film plays with your mind. You see a treat lying around within easy reach, so you look around and there is no threat around, and so you grab that treat and it tastes good. Yeah, that's nice. And then you see there is another treat, and then just follow. Okay, maybe I'll take one more, little bit, you know. And then you just follow, take the trail, and until you find yourself trapped, unable to escape the monster trap this movie RRR is. You know, this whole trap that this movie has laid out for your brain. So you just cannot escape that. So it just keeps luring you in a little bit, like it keeps you like hooking you in a little bit that you can't switch off at that moment. You need to see a little bit more, but that little bit more turns out to be like a little bit more, you know, a little bit more. It just keeps going, you know, keeps reeling you in. So the next chapter is the water. Here you get introduced to Bhim, a tribal who is trying to find the kidnapped little girl Malli and bring her back to the village, right? Again, one of the most badass character introductions of all time. You see a shirtless, ripped hunk Bhim taking on a wolf and a tiger here. Okay? If these two character introductions were not enough to hook people in, then this film lays out even more traps very early on. And soon after the character introduction, you suddenly find that Ram, who is basically a police officer working for British, right? He volunteers to catch Bhim. Okay, so you have seen these two badasses being introduced, like sort of superhuman, like hunks, right? And then you suddenly have this mouth-watering prospect of them facing off against each other, like Bhim trying to find the girl and Ram trying to stop him and arrest him. So there is this mouth-watering prospect of these two badass hunks going up against each other. And by this time, whether you realize or not, there is another hook you have been exposed to. The unashamed and unhinged masculinity of this film. So for anyone who is looking for tough, masculine, badass protagonists, this film reels them in by this point already. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers, the two of the biggest hunks of those times, when Hollywood was great, by the way. Being friends in Predator, but only if both teamed up to fight the Predator together. Only then we could compare that. But other than that, like, you know, there is that hand clasp between Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers, basically in Predator. So that's what this movie is about, you know, those hunks basically. So there is this masculinity which sadly has been lacking from Hollywood for a while now. But this film like has it all. So that's another hook for those people who want to watch those kind of gritty and masculine films. So in RRR, the trap is laid out in clear sight. You have been introduced to two badass protagonists who are now set to face off against each other. Even if that's not enough, there are even more traps RRR lays out for you. So let's look at them. So in the early stages, we have seen the RRR, the plot is set up perfectly, clearly, you know. There are no questions, like they rub it in your face, so you can't really escape that. You can't say that I didn't know what's happening. You understand everything. With minimal dialogues, like you just see everything that's happening. Just pump it into your brain. And all through these sequences, people have seen very low barrier to entry, language, social prejudices, other factors. None of them matter until this point. There is nothing in this film until this point where an English-speaking audience would shout out no to. It could be any other Hollywood film made in English language up to this point, except that it just happens to be set in India in 1920. That's what this movie feels like until this point, as it could be just Hollywood film, English language film, just happened to be set in India in 1920. So that's what it feels like. So that's the sort of feeling most people watching this film until this point would have got. And the character introductions in this movie are so good, so good. They act as like very good hooks. They not only introduce these characters, but they also set up a larger than life persona for each of them. The thing you have to understand is this, like when you talk about Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or Joker, everyone knows who they are. So you don't need to introduce those characters. RRR starts cold, and you are expected to connect to and root for the protagonists and hate the villains. And this film does a very good job, very early on in this film. It introduces these characters very clearly with minimal dialogue and mostly English dialogue. The plot is set up clearly and rubbed into your face to be sure you don't say that I did not get it later on. So it works very well for English-speaking audience until this point. To top it off, the plot is set up beautifully where you know these two hunks are going to fight it out, so you feel curious to see what is in store next. This should have been enough of a hook, right? No. This movie goes even further. Shortly after the opening intros, you see Ram and Bhim save a child in another one of those crazy action scenes. And you then see them become best buddies, best friends. I bet by the time the third action sequence comes up, you feel like, what the hell? If these are the beginning action scenes, what is in store for the rest of the film? If that's not a big enough hook to reel audience in, then what is? I fail to understand. And then on top of that, you see that plot twist happening so suddenly and so early on. You see that these two people are supposed to be enemies, becoming the best friends without knowing who the other is. Without realizing that they are supposed to be enemies. So from that point, like the tension is pre-built, right? You don't need to do anything else. You just carry on with the story to see where it leads, and that's the plot itself has that inbuilt tension. So it's very difficult to switch on from that point on because you want to know what's going to happen next, right? What are they going to do? Like, are they going to find out whether they're enemies, like, and then these two big hunks, when they fight off against each other, what's that gonna look like? Because they seem to be like superhuman guys already, So by the time you see all of these things and these crazy action sequences, like, oh, what's next? Like, what kind of action am I going to see next? So by the time you're like in for a ride, and you're like, okay, I surrender to the magic of RRR. That's that kind of film. This film comes so hard at you right from word go, and you can feel it from the beginning, salvos, that it is not a Disney film, okay? Scene by scene, it keeps luring you to watch a little bit more and a little bit more before you realize there is no turning back, By the time you get to the opening sections, like the title card of the film, by the time you get to the title card of the film, This film gets you in its trap. Hook, line, and sinker. That's it. So there is so much more in this film, and there is so much more to analyze and dissect on why this movie works so well. But that's for another video. This video is all about how RRR hooked the audience who avoided Indian films. This film was about how RRR bypassed their barriers and prejudices to trap them early on in this film. I want to hear from you on what was the moment that hooked you in. That would be interesting. Until now, everyone I have talked to, until the title card and the realization that they have become best friends. So everyone I've talked to basically got hooked at some point or like prior to that, and by the time the title card came around, they had surrendered, right? So I want to know, like, what point did you get hooked in? That'll be interesting discussion, you know. So please put those things down in the comments below, and we'll discuss them in the comments, all right? And maybe like in one of the future videos. Also, this is a brand new channel, the first video I'm putting on this channel. So watch out for more videos on RRR, more analysis on RRR on this video. And obviously there is one more thing, you know. I'm going to put down my recommendations for newly converted fans of Indian cinema on my channel in my future videos. And not just films, like Indian songs that I feel, because I've lived in West most of my life and I grew up in India when I was young. So I understand both sides of the culture. So I understand like what things could work well in a Western context. So for example, I know like a lot of people like, you know, when somebody like watches RRR, then people go around like suggesting Pushpa. You know? Not in a million years like anyone like outside of that country would ever like Pushpa. It's very difficult, you know. On the other hand, there are like films like Dhakar or Attack, which a lot of people in the West would actually love those films. You know, if they may not become the biggest hits ever, but they would be decent. Like there would be some people who would go and watch those films and like them. But in India, they were like super flop, right? So I understand the differences. So there could be a lot of films that I know may not have done well in India, but they would do very well in the Western context. And many films that have done really well in India, but I know for a fact that it's very, very difficult for any non-Indian to actually like those films. So I will be able to, you know, bridge that gap. So not just films, songs, some good Indian recipes. So think of it as India Curated, you know, series. So we'll just, you know, everything India, the best of India, I'll bring to you in this channel. All right. So look forward to you. See you again in another one of my videos. Until then, take care. Bye.